You guys just keep asking for the more Reddit stories. So, I'm ready with the new tale. Let's read some cool, interesting cheating wife Reddit stories. And guys, I'm trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year, and I think we can do it. So please subscribe and let's get straight into this one.
Throwaway account because I don't even know where to start with this. I'm a 38-year-old man, and until 2 months ago, I thought I had my life figured out. I'm married to Lisa, 36, my wife of 10 years, who I thought was my best friend, my partner in crime, the love of my life. We have 2 kids, a son and a daughter, and I've spent every waking moment working to provide for them. I built this life for us from scratch, juggling a demanding job and countless late nights because I believed it was all worth it. Until it wasn't. It all started innocently enough, or so I thought. There's this new neighbor, Dan, who moved in 3 houses down. He's 29, all charm and wit, the kind of guy who makes everyone laugh at barbecues and neighborhood gatherings. I didn't think much of him at first. Why would I? He was just another face in the crowd, another name to add to the community text chain. Lisa seemed to like him, though, and I figured it was just her being friendly. She's always been the outgoing type, the one who can strike up a conversation with anyone. I admired that about her, until it became my downfall. A few weeks back, we had one of those impromptu neighborhood BBQs. I remember it so clearly because it was the first time I noticed something was off. Lisa and Dan spent a lot of time talking, more than I was comfortable with, but I told myself it was nothing. I mean, we're all neighbors, right? No harm in being friendly. Except, looking back, I should have trusted my gut. There was something in the way her laughter lingered a little too long, in the way his hand brushed hers, accidentally, when they passed each other by the grill. I ignored it, though. Chalked it up to overthinking. I had a major project at work that week and didn't have the bandwidth to focus on anything else. But that was my first mistake. You see, Lisa and I had always been open with each other. Or so I thought. That's why it never occurred to me to question her, or to keep tabs on what she was up to when I wasn't around. The second red flag came a week later, when I came home early from a work trip. Lisa hadn't expected me until late that night, but my meetings wrapped up sooner than planned, and I wanted to surprise her. I thought maybe we could have a nice dinner, reconnect a little. We'd been growing distant lately, not fighting but just off. I couldn't put my finger on it. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Dan's car parked a little too close to the curb. My stomach dropped. Still, I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe he'd stopped by to borrow something. Maybe they were just chatting over coffee like good neighbors do. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband. But then I walked inside. The house was eerily quiet, except for the sound of low voices coming from the back patio. I crept closer, trying to stay calm, trying not to let my imagination run wild. And that's when I saw them. Lisa was sitting on the edge of the patio table, her body tilted toward Dan, who was leaning in just a little too close. They weren't touching, not yet, but the tension in the air was palpable. Her laugh was soft, almost flirtatious, and it sent a chill down my spine. My stomach twisted into knots as I realized what I was witnessing wasn't innocent. Not by a long shot. I stood there, frozen, until Lisa noticed me. Her face went pale, and she jumped off the table like she'd been burned. "You're home early," she stammered, her voice shaky. Dan looked between us, a smug grin creeping across his face like he'd just been caught in a game he knew he could win. "Hey, man," he said, way too casually. "Just helping Lisa out with some patio repairs." Repairs. Sure. Because nothing says repairs like leaning into someone's wife with bedroom eyes. I didn't say a word. Just turned around and walked back inside. Lisa followed me, her voice full of forced cheer. "It's not what you think," she kept saying, over and over again. I didn't respond. I couldn't. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears, drowning out her excuses. When Dan finally left, I confronted her. She denied everything, of course. Said I was being ridiculous, that Dan was just a friend, that I had nothing to worry about. But her words felt hollow, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, replaying every interaction I'd seen between them, dissecting every glance, every laugh. I felt like a fool. Like the world I'd built was crumbling around me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But if there's one thing you should know about me, it's this: I don't act on emotion. I'm a planner, a strategist. And if Lisa thought I was just going to sit back and let this slide, she had no idea who she was dealing with. The next morning, Lisa acted like everything was fine, like we hadn't just had the most awkward, tension-filled night of our marriage. She made coffee, kissed the kids goodbye, and headed out for her usual yoga class. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my untouched mug, my mind a whirlwind of doubt and anger. Was I overreacting? I wanted to believe her, to trust her, but the image of her leaning toward Dan was burned into my brain. There was a connection there, a spark I hadn't seen in years. Not with me, at least. The thought twisted in my gut like a knife. So, I did what any rational man would do in my position. I started digging. Now, let me clarify, I'm not a tech genius, but I know my way around a smartphone. Lisa and I shared passwords. It was part of our trust, our understanding that there'd be no secrets between us. I waited until she was in the shower that night and grabbed her phone, hands trembling as I scrolled through her messages. At first, I found nothing unusual. Just the typical text to friends, reminders from the school, and a grocery list she'd sent herself. But then I saw a thread with Dan. It wasn't incriminating, at least, not at first glance. They'd exchanged a few casual messages about the neighborhood and the barbecue, nothing overtly flirty. But the frequency? That set off alarm bells. There were messages from every day over the past 2 weeks. Short ones, yes, but enough to make me wonder why they needed to talk so often. And then I found it. A message from him that said, "Thanks for yesterday. I haven't laughed like that in a while. You're amazing." Her reply was even worse. "You're too sweet, Dan. Yesterday was fun. Let's keep this between us, okay? Don't want Jake getting the wrong idea." Grinny face with sweat. The wrong idea? The wrong idea? I stared at those words until they blurred in front of me. My heart pounded as 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. What was yesterday? Why did it need to stay between them? My pulse quickened, and I had to remind myself to breathe. I took screenshots of the messages, emailed them to myself, and put her phone back exactly as I'd found it. If Lisa was hiding something, I needed more than a single message to prove it. I needed evidence. Over the next week, I watched her like a hawk. She didn't seem any different, no guilty glances, no suspicious behavior, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She was still messaging Dan, though she'd muted their notifications. That little detail almost made me laugh. Did she really think I wouldn't notice? I kept my cool, pretending everything was fine. If I confronted her too soon, she'd just deny it, and I'd have nothing to back me up. No, I needed to be patient. So, I played the perfect husband, helping with the kids, planning a date night, even suggesting we take a weekend trip. She agreed with a smile, and for a moment, I almost believed we were okay. But then there was Dan. He was always there, lingering at the edges of my life like an unwelcome shadow. I saw him jogging past our house in the mornings, stopping to chat with Lisa if she was outside watering the plants. I spotted his car parked near the grocery store when she ran out to grab a few things. And every time, I felt my anger simmering just beneath the surface. I decided to take things up a notch. I started keeping track of her schedule, noting when she'd leave the house and where she said she was going. Then I started checking. Once, when she claimed she was at yoga, I drove by the studio and didn't see her car. Instead, I found it parked 2 blocks away, in front of a cafe. I didn't go inside. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, but I made a note of it. Another piece of the puzzle. Then came the business trip. I told Lisa I'd be out of town for 3 days to attend a conference. It was the perfect opportunity to test my theory. I left the house that morning, suitcase in hand, and drove to a hotel about 30 miles away. I checked in, waited a few hours, and then headed back to the neighborhood, parking in a spot where I could see our house without being seen. Sure enough, Dan's car pulled into the driveway less than 2 hours later. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought I might break it. I watched as he got out, holding a bottle of wine, and rang the doorbell. Lisa opened the door, her face lighting up when she saw him. She stepped aside, letting him in, and then, nothing. The door closed, and I was left staring at the house, my heart pounding. I sat there for hours, waiting, watching, willing myself to stay calm. I told myself I'd get my proof soon enough, that I didn't need to barge in there and make a scene. But it took every ounce of self-control I had not to march up to that door and demand answers. When Dan finally left, it was past midnight. He looked relaxed, smug even, as he walked back to his car. I snapped a photo of him leaving, my hand trembling as I held the camera. Lisa didn't come outside to say goodbye. She didn't need to. The damage was already done. I spent the rest of the night in my car, staring at the house, wondering what had happened to the life I thought I knew. My mind was a whirlwind of anger and betrayal, but beneath it all was a cold, calculating part of me that was already planning my next move. If Lisa wanted to play games, she was about to find out just how far I was willing to go. The morning after Dan left, I returned to the hotel, checked out, and went home as if nothing had happened. Lisa greeted me at the door with a kiss and a cheerful, "How was the trip?" I forced a smile, suppressing the rage boiling beneath my skin, and muttered something about long meetings and bad coffee. She didn't suspect a thing. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That day, I started laying the groundwork for my plan. First, I bought a hidden camera. Nothing flashy, just something small enough to blend into the background. I told myself it was for security purposes. After all, we had kids, and who doesn't want their home to be safe? Lisa didn't question it when I installed it in the living room, claiming it was a just-in-case measure. What she didn't know was that I'd also hidden a second camera in our bedroom. I hated invading our privacy like this, but I needed to know the truth. Next, I reached out to a lawyer. I didn't mention the affair, at least not yet. I just wanted to understand my options, to know how to protect myself and the kids if things spiraled. The lawyer was thorough, explaining everything from asset division to custody arrangements. Hearing it all laid out made the situation feel even more real, and I left his office with a sick feeling in my stomach. But I also felt prepared. If Lisa thought she could keep this secret and walk away unscathed, she was about to learn otherwise. Over the next week, I continued to act like everything was fine. I kissed Lisa goodbye every morning, helped the kids with homework, and even planned a family movie night. But behind the scenes, I was watching the footage from the cameras. It was like living in a nightmare, seeing my wife in those quiet, vulnerable moments and wondering if they were all lies. It didn't take long for my suspicions to be confirmed. 3 days after I installed the cameras, I caught Dan coming over again. This time, it was during the day, while the kids were at school, and I was at work. The footage showed Lisa letting him in, laughing at something he said as she closed the door behind him. They sat on the couch, talking at first, but then he leaned in closer, his hand resting on her thigh. I watched in silence as Lisa didn't push him away. Instead, she leaned into him, their faces inches apart, until they kissed. I paused the video, my hands trembling as I stared at the screen. There it was. Proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof that the woman I'd devoted my life to was cheating on me. I felt sick, like the air had been sucked out of the room. But at the same time, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. This was what I needed. The final piece of the puzzle. I spent the next few days gathering more evidence. I didn't just want proof of the affair, I wanted to understand the extent of it. How long had this been going on? How far had they taken it? I combed through Lisa's phone again, piecing together fragments of their conversations. They'd been careful, avoiding anything too explicit, but there were enough breadcrumbs to paint a picture. References to yesterday's fun and next time made it clear this wasn't a one-time thing. I also kept tabs on Dan. He was single, no kids, living in a rental house with a revolving door of friends and parties. He worked remotely, giving him plenty of free time to cozy up to my wife. The more I learned about him, the more I hated him. He was everything I wasn't: carefree, spontaneous, and completely reckless. And somehow, Lisa had been drawn to that. The hardest part of those days wasn't the spying or the sleepless nights. It was pretending everything was normal. Sitting across from Lisa at the dinner table, listening to her talk about her day while knowing she was lying through her teeth. Watching her tuck our kids into bed, kiss them goodnight, and then check her phone for a message from Dan. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to make her feel the pain she was causing me. But I held back. I knew the time wasn't right. Finally, I had enough. The footage, the messages, the timeline, it all painted a clear picture. Lisa had been seeing Dan for at least a month, maybe longer. They'd met in secret, lied to me and the kids, and carried on like it was nothing. My trust was shattered, and any hope I had of salvaging our marriage was gone. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. That Friday, I told Lisa I had another work trip and would be gone for the weekend. She barely blinked, her only concern being whether I'd be back in time for a family gathering on Sunday. "Of course," I said, smiling through gritted teeth. I packed a bag, kissed her goodbye, and left. But instead of heading to the airport, I parked my car a few blocks away and waited. It didn't take long for Dan to show up. I watched as he strolled up to the house, carrying a bottle of wine like he owned the place. Lisa opened the door, smiling, and let him in. This time, I didn't just sit and wait. I gave them an hour, enough time to get comfortable, and then I walked up to the front door. My heart was pounding, my fists clenched at my sides, but my mind was clear. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a man with a plan. I rang the doorbell. Standing on my own doorstep, I felt like an outsider in my own life. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and my palms were slick with sweat. But I wasn't turning back. Not now. I rang the doorbell again. I could hear muffled voices inside, hurried footsteps, and then the door creaked open just enough for Lisa's face to appear. Her expression shifted from confusion to panic in an instant. "Jake," she said, her voice high-pitched and strained. What are you doing here? I thought you were on a work trip?" I interrupted, stepping forward. She had no choice but to let the door swing open fully, revealing Dan standing in the living room, holding the bottle of wine, looking like a deer caught in headlights. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his smirk replaced with wide-eyed fear. "Well, isn't this cozy?" I said, my voice cold and steady. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. Lisa looked like she might faint. "Jake, I can explain, don't," I snapped, cutting her off. I turned to Dan, who was trying to muster up some semblance of his usual cocky attitude. "You! Get out of my house!" "Hey man, I think we should," I said. "Get out," I growled, my voice sharp enough to make him flinch. I didn't yell, didn't threaten, just stared him down, daring him to test me. He glanced at Lisa, who was frozen in place, then back at me. Finally, he nodded and set the wine bottle down on the coffee table like it was some kind of peace offering. Without another word, he headed for the door. I stepped aside to let him pass, then followed him out, closing the door firmly behind us. He turned to say something, but I stopped him with a single glare. "Don't come back," I said. "If I see you anywhere near this house or my family again, I swear to God, you'll regret it." Dan opened his mouth to respond but thought better of it. He walked down the driveway, got into his car, and drove off without looking back. When I stepped back inside, Lisa was sitting on the edge of the couch, her head in her hands. She didn't look up as I approached, but I could see her shoulders trembling. "Jake, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "Save it," I said, sitting across from her. "I don't want to hear any excuses, Lisa. I want the truth. All of it." Right now. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. For a moment, I thought she might actually come clean. But then she shook her head, her lips trembling. It's not what you think. I laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. Not what I think. Are you serious right now? I have proof, Lisa. I know everything. The texts, the meetings, the cameras. Yes, I put cameras in this house. I've seen you with him. I know what you've been doing. Her face crumpled, and she let out a choked sob. Jake, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen? I repeated, my voice rising. You've been lying to me, to our kids, to everyone. How long, Lisa? How long has this been going on? She hesitated, wiping at her tears with trembling hands. A couple of months, she admitted finally. It started after the barbecue. He made me feel, don't. I interrupted, holding up a hand. Don't you dare try to justify this. Don't you dare tell me he made you feel something I couldn't. You had a choice, Lisa. You chose him. Her sobs grew louder, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the footage, the messages, the lies. Any sympathy I might have had evaporated. I've already spoken to a lawyer, I said, my voice cold and flat. This marriage is over. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. Jake, no. Please don't say that. We can fix this. I'll end it with Dan, I swear. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. It's too late for that, I said, standing up. You should start thinking about what you're going to tell the kids, because I'm not lying to them for you. Jake, please! She cried, reaching for me, but I stepped out of her grasp. I'm done, Lisa, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. You destroyed us. I left the house that night, driving aimlessly until I ended up at a cheap motel on the edge of town. I didn't sleep. How could I? My mind was a storm of anger, betrayal, and grief. I thought about the life we'd built, the memories we'd shared, and how easily she'd thrown it all away. But beneath the pain was a grim sense of satisfaction. I'd exposed the truth. I had my proof. And now, it was her turn to face the consequences. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told him to move forward with the divorce. If Lisa thought she could rebuild the life she'd shattered, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. The days following the confrontation felt like a haze. I went back to the house only to pack a few things and see the kids. Lisa was there, trying to act like everything was normal, but the tension was suffocating. The kids could sense something was wrong, of course, they could, but I wasn't ready to tell them the truth yet. Not until I had everything in place. Lisa tried everything to get me to talk. She followed me around the house, pleading, crying, begging me to give her another chance. She said all the things you'd expect, how she loved me, how she'd made a terrible mistake, how she'd do whatever it took to fix things. But her words rang hollow. I couldn't trust her, not after what she'd done. Jake, she said one night, as I was grabbing a duffel bag from the closet. Think about the kids. We can't just throw everything away. I froze for a moment, her words hitting me harder than I expected. The kids. They didn't deserve this. But then I thought about the lies Lisa had already told them, the secret she'd been keeping while pretending to be the perfect wife and mother. You should have thought about them before you invited Dan into our lives, I said coldly. This isn't on me, Lisa. You did this. Her tears came harder after that, but I was done. I threw the bag over my shoulder and walked out the door. That weekend, I sat the kids down at my parents' house. Lisa wasn't there. I'd made sure of that. I kept it simple, telling them that their mom and I were going through a tough time and that we'd be living apart for a while. My son, who's 9, looked at me with wide, confused eyes. Did you and Mom have a fight? He asked. I hesitated, not wanting to burden him with the truth. Something like that, I said. But no matter what happens, we both love you and your sister very much. That will never change. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't satisfied with my answer. My daughter, who's 6, didn't say much, just curled up next to me on the couch, her little hand clutching my shirt. It broke my heart, but I knew it was the right thing to do. They deserved honesty, even if they couldn't understand the full story yet. Meanwhile, Lisa's world was beginning to unravel. Word of the affair spread faster than I expected. Our neighborhood is small, and gossip travels quickly. It started with a few hushed whispers at the PTA meeting, then escalated to pointed stares and awkward silences at the grocery store. Lisa tried to play it off, but it was clear she was struggling. I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd brought this on herself. Dan, on the other hand, seemed to think he'd come out of this unscathed. He continued jogging past the house like nothing had happened, his smug grin firmly in place. That changed when I ran into him at the local hardware store. "You've got a lot of nerve showing your face around here," I said, stepping into his path. He smirked, the arrogance practically oozing off him. "I don't know what you're talking about, man." "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "You wrecked my marriage, my family. You think you're going to get away with that?" His smirk faltered for a split second, but then he shrugged. "Look, it's not my fault your wife wasn't happy." I saw red. Before I knew what I was doing, I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him against the nearest shelf. Tools clattered to the floor as I leaned in close, my voice low and deadly. "If I see you near my house again," I growled, "I won't just talk to you. Do you understand me?" He nodded quickly, his cocky demeanor replaced with genuine fear. I released him, straightened my jacket, and walked out of the store without looking back. Back at home, Lisa was still trying to salvage what was left of her reputation. She'd been calling and texting me nonstop, alternating between apologies and accusations. One message read, "You're ruining my life, Jake." Wasn't the confrontation enough? Another, "I miss you. I miss us. Please, let's talk." But I ignored them all. My lawyer had advised me to keep communication to a minimum, and besides, I didn't trust myself to respond without saying something I'd regret. The final nail in Lisa's coffin came when I sent the evidence to a few key people, friends, family members, even a couple of mutual acquaintances who I knew wouldn't keep quiet. It wasn't out of malice, but I wanted the truth to be out there. No more lies, no more pretending. The fallout was immediate. Her closest friends stopped returning her calls. Her own sister, who had always been her biggest supporter, called me to apologize for Lisa's behavior. "I don't even recognize her anymore," she said. "What happened to the woman who used to value family above all else?" "I wish I knew," I replied, my voice heavy with exhaustion. By the end of the month, the divorce papers were finalized. Lisa signed them reluctantly, her tears smudging the ink on the last page. She asked one last time if there was any chance of reconciliation, but I shook my head. "Some things can't be undone," I said, my voice steady but firm. She nodded, defeated, and left without another word. I moved back into the house shortly after, taking the kids with me. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to give them the stability they deserved. Lisa moved into a small apartment across town and was granted limited visitation rights. She tried to stay involved in their lives, but the cracks in her relationship with them were already beginning to show. As for Dan, he disappeared from the neighborhood not long after the confrontation at the hardware store. Rumor has it he moved back to his parents' house a few states away. Good riddance. Even now, months later, the pain hasn't fully gone away. Some nights, I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we ended up here. I don't have all the answers, and maybe I never will. But one thing is certain, I've learned the hard way that trust, once broken, can never truly be repaired. And as for Lisa? She'll have to live with the choices she made. The first few weeks after Lisa moved out were some of the hardest of my life. The house felt emptier, quieter, even with the kids running around. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of what we'd lost, a framed photo of our wedding day on the mantel, her favorite coffee mug still in the cupboard, the half-finished garden project we planned to complete together. It was like living in the ruins of a life I'd spent a decade building. But slowly, the pieces started to come together. The kids adapted faster than I expected. At first, there were tears, questions, and the occasional tantrum. My son, ever the inquisitive one, asked why Mom didn't come home anymore. I kept my answers honest but age-appropriate. Mom made some mistakes, I said one night, tucking him into bed. But she still loves you very much. We both do. He nodded, though his eyes were clouded with confusion. Are you mad at her? Yes, I admitted. But being mad doesn't mean I don't want her to be part of your life. It was the truth, even if it stung to say it. No matter how much Lisa had hurt me, she was still their mother, and I didn't want my anger to poison their relationship with her. Lisa's visits were awkward at first. The kids were excited to see her, but there was an undercurrent of tension they couldn't ignore. My son clung to me when she arrived, his usual exuberance dampened. My daughter, who had always been a mama's girl, seemed hesitant, like she wasn't sure where she stood anymore. Lisa tried, I'll give her that. She brought their favorite snacks, planned outings to the zoo and the park, and showered them with affection. But the cracks in her connection with them were already showing. They'd ask why she wasn't staying for dinner or why she didn't tuck them in at night, and I could see the guilt eating away at her. Meanwhile, I threw myself into creating a new sense of normalcy for the kids. I rearranged the house, swapping out old furniture for new pieces that didn't carry the weight of old memories. I turned the spare bedroom into a playroom, complete with a beanbag chair and a small bookshelf for their growing collection of stories. It was a way to reclaim the space, to make it ours. At work, I became more focused than ever. My boss noticed the change and offered me a promotion, a chance to lead a new project that could set me up for a major career move. The timing couldn't have been better. I needed something to pour my energy into, something that didn't remind me of Lisa or Dan, or the life I'd lost. Despite the progress, there were moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was Lisa, laughing at some inside joke during our honeymoon. The kids, grinning from ear to ear during last year's Christmas morning. The four of us, happy and whole, or so I thought. Before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. I hated her for what she'd done, for destroying the life we'd built, but a part of me still missed the woman I'd fallen in love with. It was a cruel paradox, loving someone who had become a stranger. As the weeks turned into months, the gossip in the neighborhood began to die down. People stopped giving me those pitying looks at the grocery store, and the whispers faded into the background. Life went on, as it always does. I even started to reconnect with old friends, people I'd lost touch with during the chaos of marriage and parenthood. They'd invite me out for drinks or a round of golf, and though it felt strange at first, I slowly began to enjoy myself again. For the first time in years, I wasn't just a husband or a father, I was Jake. Lisa, on the other hand, wasn't faring as well. From what I heard through the grapevine, her social circle had all but disbanded. The friends who once flocked to her for advice or support were now keeping their distance. She was trying to rebuild her life, but it was clear she was struggling. One night she called me out of the blue. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what she wanted. "Jake," she said, her voice shaky, "I need to talk to you." I sighed, already bracing myself. "What is it, Lisa?" I'm sorry," she said, and for the first time, it sounded genuine. "Not just for what I did, but for everything. For not appreciating you, for taking you for granted. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to tell her to shove her apology, that it was too little, too late. But another part, the part that still remembered the good times, softened. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "But an apology doesn't fix what you broke, Lisa. It doesn't bring back the trust, or the life we had." "I know," she whispered. I just wanted to say it." We sat in silence for a moment before I ended the call. Her words lingered in my mind, but they didn't change anything. The damage was done, and I was finally learning how to move forward without her. By the time summer rolled around, The rhythms of my new life had started to take shape. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was something I could work with. I was learning how to balance work and fatherhood, how to create moments of joy for my kids despite the fractured family dynamic. And maybe, just maybe, I was beginning to feel like myself again. Lisa continued her regular visitation schedule, and while the tension between us never completely disappeared, it became more manageable. We communicated only when necessary, sticking to logistics about the kids or the house. Every now and then, she'd bring up the past, trying to gauge if I'd softened toward her. I hadn't. Once, she asked me if I'd thought about dating again. The question caught me off guard. "Why do you care?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She looked down, fiddling with her hands. "I don't know. I guess. I just want to know if you're happy." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken regret. I didn't answer her. I wasn't ready to explore that part of my life yet, and even if I were, Lisa wouldn't be the person I'd share it with. One evening, after I'd put the kids to bed, I found myself scrolling through a local events page online. A community group was hosting a charity event downtown, a small concert to raise money for a children's hospital. Music had always been my escape, a way to lose myself in something that didn't demand answers or solutions. On a whim, I decided to go. The venue was small but cozy, with dim lighting and rows of chairs set up in front of a makeshift stage. The band was a local group I'd never heard of, but their music was surprisingly good, raw, honest, and unpolished in the best way. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of something other than anger or sadness. It wasn't happiness, exactly, but it was close. As I was leaving, a woman approached me. She was around my age, with a warm smile and a camera slung around her neck. "Did you enjoy the show?" she asked, her voice light and friendly. "Yeah," I said, nodding. "They were great." She introduced herself as Maggie, a photographer who volunteered with the community group. We chatted for a while, and I found myself relaxing in her presence. She had a calm, easygoing energy that put me at ease, and before I knew it, I was smiling, a real smile, not the forced kind I'd been wearing for months. When she handed me her card and suggested I check out one of the group's upcoming events, I hesitated. Part of me was wary, afraid of opening myself up to anything new. But another part, the part that was tired of being stuck in the past, told me to take the card. Over the next few weeks, I started attending more community events, sometimes with the kids, sometimes on my own. I ran into Maggie a few times, and each time, our conversations grew a little longer, a little more personal. She was easy to talk to, and she didn't pry into my life or push for details I wasn't ready to share. It was refreshing. One evening, as we were chatting after a charity bake sale, she asked if I'd like to grab coffee sometime. I hesitated, the old doubts creeping in. Was I ready for this? Could I trust someone again after what Lisa had done? But then I looked at her, at the genuine warmth in her eyes, and decided to take a chance. Our first coffee date was simple, just two people getting to know each other over lattes and pastries. She told me about her work as a freelance photographer, her love of hiking, and her dream of traveling the world someday. I told her about the kids, my job, and my newfound appreciation for solo parenting. We laughed, we shared stories, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt hope. As things with Maggie slowly developed, I kept my focus on the kids. They were my priority, and I didn't want to bring someone new into their lives until I was sure it was the right decision. Maggie understood that, and she never pressured me to move faster than I was comfortable with. Lisa, of course, found out eventually. She saw Maggie's name pop up on a flyer in the kitchen and asked about her. "She's just a friend," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Lisa didn't push, but I could see the flicker of something in her expression, jealousy, maybe, or regret. Whatever it was, it didn't matter. My life wasn't hers to control anymore. Months later, I introduced Maggie to the kids. It was a casual meeting, just a trip to the park, with no expectations or pressure. She brought a kite and spent the afternoon running around with them, laughing as they tried to keep it in the air. My son warmed up to her quickly, impressed by her knowledge of comic book heroes. My daughter took a little longer, but by the end of the day, she was holding Maggie's hand as they walked back to the car. Seeing them together, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known I was missing. It wasn't perfect, and I knew there would still be challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. Time has a way of smoothing over even the sharpest edges. It didn't heal everything. There are scars that will always linger, but it gave me perspective. By the time the first anniversary of the separation rolled around, life had settled into something resembling normalcy. Maggie became a steady presence in my life, though we kept things deliberate and thoughtful. I wasn't rushing into anything, and she respected that. The kids adored her, and she seemed to have an instinctive understanding of when to step in and when to give us space. It wasn't always easy, navigating the complexities of a blended relationship, but we were making it work. Lisa, on the other hand, was still finding her footing. She was doing her best to rebuild her relationship with the kids, but there was an unspoken distance that hadn't been there before. My son, in particular, had become more guarded around her, asking pointed questions about why she didn't live with us anymore. I let Lisa handle those moments on her own. It wasn't my job to cover for her mistakes. Every now and then, she'd bring up the past, apologizing again for what she'd done or trying to revisit old wounds. I shut those conversations down quickly. "I've moved on, Lisa," I told her one evening after she tried to broach the subject of reconciliation. "You should too." She didn't argue, but the sadness in her eyes was hard to miss. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I reminded myself of everything that had led us to this point. Her choices, her betrayal, those were on her, not me. Maggie and I spent more time together as the months went by. She had a way of bringing light into even the darkest moments, and her sense of adventure pushed me out of my comfort zone in the best way. One weekend, she convinced me to take the kids on a camping trip, something I'd never done before. I was hesitant at first, worried about everything from bad weather to wild animals, but it ended up being one of the best weekends we'd ever had. We hiked, roasted marshmallows, and told ghost stories around the campfire. Maggie showed the kids how to navigate using the stars, and I watched as they looked up at her with wide-eyed wonder. In those moments, I realized how much she had come to mean to all of us. There were still challenges, of course. Co-parenting with Lisa wasn't always smooth, and there were days when the weight of everything felt overwhelming. But I'd learned to take things one step at a time, focusing on what I could control and letting go of what I couldn't. It wasn't a perfect system, but it worked. A turning point came one evening, as Maggie and I were sitting on the porch after the kids had gone to bed. We were sipping wine, the sound of crickets filling the warm summer air, when she reached over and took my hand. "You're doing an amazing job, you know," she said, her voice soft but firm. "With the kids, with everything. You've been through so much, but you're still standing. That says a lot about the kind of person you are." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd been running on autopilot, focusing on survival rather than self-reflection. Hearing her say those things made me realize how far I'd come, not just as a father, but as a person. "Thank you," I said, squeezing her hand. "I couldn't have done it without you." She smiled, and in that moment I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Real, unshakable hope for the future. A few months later, Maggie and I took the kids to a community festival downtown. There were food trucks, live music, and a small carnival set up in the park. As we wandered through the crowd, I spotted Lisa across the way, standing alone near the carousel. She waved when she saw us, and after a moment's hesitation, I waved back. She approached cautiously, her eyes darting between me, Maggie, and the kids. "Hey," she said, her voice tentative. "How's it going?" "Good," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "We're just enjoying the festival." She nodded, her gaze lingering on Maggie for a moment. "Hi, I'm Lisa," she said, extending a hand. Maggie smiled warmly. "Maggie. It's nice to meet you." The exchange was brief but civil, and as Lisa walked away, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't closure, exactly, but it was a step in the right direction. Looking back, I wouldn't say I'm glad for what happened. The pain, the betrayal, it's not something I'd wish on anyone. But it taught me something important. I'm stronger than I thought, and life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Maggie and I are still taking things slow, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm on solid ground. My kids are happy, I'm happy, and the future, while uncertain, feels bright. And that's enough for me.
Oh my god. Another really good one. I really hope you enjoyed this Reddit story video. I had a great time reading this. If you want more of this kind of content, just leave a comment, let me know. Follow my channel. I'm really trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year. And we can do it. It's going to happen, guys. Thank you so much. Now, everybody have a great night and have a sweet dreams.